sentiment generally, I have noticed in our country, especially also in the government, that India is a very large market, so everybody will come here, willy-nilly.
That complacency, we have to look beyond that.
It's a myth.
Yeah.
You are not a large market. You are a large population.
Right.
You will become a large market, but at $2,800 per capita, you're not yet a large market. The real constraint on consumption is employment.
Right.
Because consumption demand comes from your permanent income, sort of hypothesis, which is when the individual is certain about her future in terms of income, then he or she consumes even more than what she earns and borrows, etc. Has come up with an industrial policy, but that industrial policy has not yet worked as well as it can, because the ease of doing business is not yet there, has not yet reached where it should be, and uncertainty is anathema, is actually the complete contradiction to investment. Investor needs a very certain, a very sort of predictable future, and that I think has been missing for whatever reason, and the government should. And it's related to the ease of doing business.
Right.
Because if you make an investment,
Right.
and then you find several sort of obstacles or some retrospective measure being brought up, I think that creates the uncertainty, and that might be the reason for the corporate sector being shy.
Hello and welcome to Fortune India in Conversation. I am Ashutosh Kumar. The West Asia crisis has come as a huge shock to the Indian economy, and to talk to us about the policy paradigm, I have with me Mr. Rajiv Kumar, the former VC of Niti Aayog. Thanks a lot for being with us today, sir. Sir, I'd like to understand from you, sir, there are multiple voices on the impact, on the likely repercussions of the West Asia crisis. In your view, how grave is the crisis, sir?
I think the best way to put it is that the crisis should not be underestimated.
Right.
I mean, it is better to prepare more for the consequences than to be underprepared, because we don't know how long this crisis will last. We don't know, what the scope can be, how many Gulf countries can be involved. So, because it's really a sort of, a lot of unknowns are there. Therefore, I think we should be preparing as much as possible for our energy security, principally for our energy security, but also for other inputs and commodities, which we get. For example, fertilizers. I think there is the government should be now doing whatever it can to ensure the adequate supply of fertilizers for the Kharif crop. So that's one way of putting it. The other way of putting it is that it has taken us by surprise.
Right.
The gravity of it.
Right.
And I think, therefore, for future, we need to make sure that such surprises are met with greater resilience rather than what we have today.
Sir, you've mentioned about some measures. In fact, there have been series of measures that the government has been taking. But what should be that big policy paradigm for the future, especially at a time when we are living in a VUCA world? Ever since COVID, we have had problems, be it Russia-Ukraine, be it the Trump tariffs as well, and then this particular war. So what are the big ideas for India in terms of policy and in terms of macroeconomic management?
I mean, especially with reference to the Hormuz crisis,
right.
I think the government now should accelerate, because it's already doing that, accelerate the generation of renewable energy in our country. The more you can't do enough, as it were. That's basically that's the idea. And actually, with the hydrogen mission, with our nuclear, now Kalpakam coming online, the thorium, the fast breeder reactor, the cabinet's approval of the small modular nuclear reactor. Energy security is the key for going forward. And I think, therefore, the more the attention we can give it, the better it is. Today, renewables are 50% of our capacity, but hardly 20% of our generation, of our consumption. Now that has to be ramped up. So that's one big move, and for that, what you need to do is to integrate all the energy ministries into one. so that you can bring them all together. They are not siloed. They know exactly, and therefore an energy plan can be made, for the country, and bringing the states on board.
Right.
So that will be required. So that's one. The other thing is that we need to go back to what we did in 1991, which is we liberalized at that time, and we should look at now again whether more liberalization is needed, especially for our domestic investors.
Okay.
Whether they need more space, they need more opportunities, they need more support from the government. Now, the government has come up with an industrial policy, but that industrial policy has not yet worked as well as it can, because the ease of doing business is not yet there. Has not yet reached where it should be. And again, here the role of the states is very important. So I think the center can do whatever it does, but that can be only that much. So you've got to bring the states on board to say that let's do it together. So that's the second one. And the third, I think, very big one for me has always been actually of improving our share of in the world trade,
Right.
world trade of manufactured goods.
Right.
I think that's the key, but what will give us the real measure
Right.
of our economic competitiveness, of our global competitiveness
Right.
and growth.
Sir, I'll come to world trade, but the first 2 points that you mentioned basically in terms of investments by the domestic industry and in terms of ease of doing business as well. What we are seeing is, and obviously everybody, all of us who are kind of closely monitoring economy are seeing, is that the government has been doing a lot of heavy lifting in the last 5-6 years, ever since COVID, so to say, in terms of capex and all. But somehow the corporate sector is actually not coming on board. So this is also related somewhat to the ease of business point that you mentioned. But in your view, what is it that is actually holding back our corporates from kind of coming forward and putting in that big money into the economy?
You're absolutely right that the government has done a lot of heavy lifting. Many of our perennial deficits, like the infrastructure deficit,
Right.
the energy deficit, the logistics problem, they've all been tackled in a major way by the government over the last 10 years.
Right.
So therefore, it becomes surprising as to why the private corporate sector is not coming up with greater investment, which, but this is not new. It's been almost a decade that the private corporate investment has been very mild, in fact, much lower. And I think my own way is that there is an environment of uncertainty in the country. Because by uncertainty, I mean that the investor is not sure about what will be the consequence of him taking some step, or some new investment or expanding capacity. They're not sure as to where, what will be the return on that, and or what will be the sort of long-term future for that. And uncertainty is anathema, is actually the complete contradiction to investment. Investor needs a very certain, a very sort of predictable future, and that I think has been missing for whatever reason, and the government should. And it's related to the ease of doing business.
Right, right.
Because if you make an investment,
Right.
and then you find several sort of obstacles or some retrospective measure being brought up, I think that creates the uncertainty, and that might be the reason for the corporate sector being shy.
Are there some steps that the government can take at this point of time to kind of bring corporate sector on board to put money in the economy?
You see, a very generic, very basic point, I suppose, is that in our country, unfortunately, we have not been able to create a platform of mutual trust, between the government and the business and the academia and the civil society. The four principal stakeholders continue to work on the basis of mutual mistrust. Now, how will that be changed is a big question.
Right.
Now, for a few, the trust platform is there, but that's only a handful of
yes.
handful of large corporates who can claim that, but for the very large majority, that doesn't exist. And I think that's what that assurance and that basis of trust, I think, has to be created. And I think for that, the more decentralized you can get, the better off you would be. Because at the decentralized level, at the level of, for example, the state or even the districts where we in Pahlé India are now focusing, that platform for mutual trust between the principal stakeholders can be created. And trust comes from accountability. And that accountability should be now, made much stronger. And we had started something like that in Niti Aayog, and I think through the Development Monitoring Evaluation Office. And I think that needs to be reinforced. The accountability of all, of everyone, government agencies, business, people, etc. So I think that's what that is what the government can do.
Right. So coming to exports and trade, the point that you mentioned that we have to look in terms of more exports. But in a VUCA world, when the global GDP itself is compromised, what should be the trade strategies for India? One, we are seeing those bilateral agreements and all, but then again, the private sector has to kind of capitalize on that. So going forward, I mean, how do we enhance our exports and how do we tap this opportunity?
Yeah, Ashutosh, the PLI, Production Linked Incentive Scheme, offers a very good framework to be able to do that. But what's happened in my view there is that even there we have spread ourselves too thinly by now. There are 14 or 15 sectors into which PLI, is applicable. So this is this is a example of an industrial policy which has become too generalized. So my own understanding is that within those 14 fixed sectors, let's take a few, much less, few which are employment intensive, and then work with the industry, sit down with the industry to say as to how we can increase the share of those output in the world market.
Basically, bring more granularity in it.
Bring more granularity, but bring much more focus on it.
Right.
Focus, and also, working together, so that on a daily basis, if the industry's, views are sought, and if the industry's difficulties can be addressed, almost on a daily basis, that's what you require to do. Because unless you do that, the world out there is not going to let you increase your share. But but can be done. But you don't have the governance capacity to do it for all the 14 sectors. So why not concentrate on a few, and then make a success of them, and give targets to the concerned ministries, as to how much share you want to increase. I think that's the way I would go about it. And again, here I've been saying this. You see, a pan-India EXIM policy, a pan-India export promotion policy, makes no sense. Because what is good for Punjab cannot be the same for Odisha.
Right, very true.
So again, you have to make state-specific export promotion policies. So once more, and this is a role where Niti Aayog can play a very big role. You have to bring the states on board, work with them to say, these are the 4 sectors that you can work on, and we'll work together. The other state, these are the other 3 sectors that we can work on. So granularity, as you said, focus, and collaborative, work together with the private sector, state government, and the central government. A tripartite sort of arrangement that has to be done.
Exactly. So, sir, if the government has to go back on the drawing table as far as reforms are concerned, we have seen a series of reforms in the past, say, a decade. But what should be the reform priority right now?
No, the reform priority has to be to convince the private sector that we are a promotional state and not a regulatory state. And even when we regulate with predictability, and not with uncertainty, and not with retrospective effect. I think and that this government is more than positively inclined to work with the private sector at all levels, not just at a few levels, and especially at the level of the small and medium enterprises, because they employ 85% of your people. And that's where the real sentiment is created. I think that's where the government needs to focus on. If that's done, and you have to go back to the drawing board on this,
Right.
because and get get domain experts on board, and to be able to handle this and and decentralize your activity as much as possible.
So coming to some of the challenges which are at hand on the immediate, short term. So one of those being the external sector, the current account deficit and the concerns on that, and the rupee as well. Now there are a lot of talks, lot of views pertaining to the foreign exchange management and whether we should let the rupee depreciate or we should, or up to what extent should we intervene. What is your view, sir, on this particular front?
So managing the exchange rate is not a feasible option.
Right.
You can't do it. Any country which has tried it in the past, to hold on to particular exchange rate has always failed. So therefore, you have to let rupee respond to the market conditions. The best you can intervene, as has been the RBI policy, is to reduce the volatility.
Correct.
That's the best you can do. But what you need to remember is that the depreciation takes place because you don't have enough capital inflows
Right.
to cover your current account deficit.
Right.
And the current account deficit rises because your exports have
Right.
not done so well
Right.
the last several years. And I think again that re-emphasizes my point about the need to ramp up exports. By the way, and exports also we should always think about foreign exchange earnings. So exports is not just goods, exports is also services, but also export is tourism.
Correct.
And remittances. So
Correct.
we need to focus on how to increase the totality of that, because even if you do that, there will be if there remains a current account deficit, this has to be covered by capital inflows.
Correct.
Of foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investment,
Right.
or remittances.
Right.
Now that's not been happening.
Yeah.
In the
In
last,
fact, they are kind of leaving the Indian market
the
lock,
net
stock, and barrel.
and the net FDI
Yeah.
has been very minimal.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is to look introspect as to what is it that is taking the foreign investor away from us. There is a sentiment generally I have noticed in our country, especially also in the government, that India is a very large market, so everybody will come here, willy nilly.
So that complacency, we have to look beyond that.
It's a myth.
Yeah.
You are not a large market. You are a large population.
Right.
You will become a large market, but at $2,800 per capita, you're not yet a large market.
Correct.
So therefore, that complacency has to be changed, and you have to go out there and actually, woo the investor and make it, easier for, them to come in and stay, rather than, we leaving, which is what's been happening.
Do you think it is a factor only of the taxation, or as you are saying that you have to sell your story properly?
It's not. You see, the India story is very strong, but its marketing is weak. And I think that's what, and I think maybe this is your all your personnel in your embassies must be given these key performance indicators against which to measure their their performance. Forget the politics, guys. Just do the economics. Just make sure that wherever you are, whichever capital you're working in, investors from there are coming to India. Their markets are opening to us, and I'm afraid that's not happening. And our foreign service is a kind of a rule unto themselves, and they don't. I haven't seen any.
They don't do the requisite narrative building, so to say.
For the economy.
Right.
While the foreign minister is on record as saying that the best foreign policy for India is to strengthen its domestic economy.
Right.
So then might as well, transform the key performance indicators for your personnel onto the economic side. In Australia, they have merged the foreign ministry with the trade ministry.
Right.
Now, maybe you don't want to go that far, but nonetheless, that's your principal focus. So the marketing of the India story has to be done much better than what. And then again, this can be done much better in collaboration with the private sector. If the government and the private sector go out there together, and because really the best advertiser is a satisfied investor.
Right,
So
right.
if you can create that, but that's what's needed to be done.
Right, right. Sir, coming to Indian economy and the consumption. So, given the fact that there have been so many disruptions, the prices are on a spiral mode right now. So, have all the benefits of the GST cuts have they kind of vanished, or do you see some scope for consumption, or what are the concerns on consumption going forward?
The real constraint on consumption is employment.
Right.
Because consumption demand comes from your permanent income, sort of hypothesis, which is when the individual is certain about her future in terms of income, then he or she consumes even more than what she earns and borrows, etc.
Right.
But if educated unemployment is high, if the unemployment among the youth, as the PLFS data shows, official data shows, is between 15 to 17%, and their future is uncertain, then consumption, the people will, are inclined to save for the rainy day rather than consume.
Right.
So that is the situation. And the second thing is that our agriculture sector, you know, there has been income increase, but the sort of productivity increase that you would want for rural incomes to increase has not yet happened. We continue to process only 10% of our agricultural output. Why would that be? And why hasn't it improved? So those are the, so therefore again a short-term fix will not work for consumption. There is no such thing. You've got to generate the employment
Right.
at a massive scale, for actually the consumption to pick up.
And how do we do it? I mean,
Right.
because all the stakeholders have to come together.
The answer is the same as in the earlier.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
because the employment will come only out of investment.
Right, right,
And
right.
therefore you've got to make the condition propitious for the private investor,
Right.
because private investor has been the driver of India's growth for centuries. Let's not forget that. And therefore that's the sector which needs to be worked with, handheld, and it's time that we create an atmosphere in this country where government is actually seen as serving the private sector.
Right.
The Prime Minister has so often said this, but in real practice, at the official level, at the bureaucrat
Not
level,
percolating down.
that hasn't happened. And I think it's time it does. And again, it will happen at the state level, and not from Delhi. Which why am I saying that? Because real action is in the states.
Right.
And each state of ours, is larger than most countries. I mean, even a district in India is 3 million people.
Right, right.
And I just checked that there are 60 countries in the world which are smaller than 3 million. So even a district
It's
level
bigger than 60.
many countries.
Yeah.
And that is where this process should begin,
Right.
of the district administration telling the businessman that please let me know what I can do for you. And it's just completely the opposite on the ground. And I know that. You will not, why not? Why can't it be done?
Right, sir. Sir, if I may ask you right now, what should be the two immediate short-term priorities for the government and a couple of big long-term policy paradigm, the big changes that are required?
No, Ashutosh, I don't want to really talk about the short-term priorities because very often, they lead us into the wrong direction.
Right, right.
So I think you had asked an earlier the right question, which is that what are the big reforms that we can do? And I repeat myself.
Right.
And I don't want to repeat myself about ease of doing business, etc. But one which I've been talking about now since Niti Aayog, and I'm thrilled to see the Prime Minister's big support on it, is to have a very deep relook at our agricultural sector.
Right.
Because we have since the Green Revolution, we've had an agricultural sector which is totally chemical dependent.
Right.
Chemical fertilizers, herbicide, pesticide, etc., etc. And I think that has run its course. And therefore, if you really want if you want a real change in agriculture, you have to examine the feasibility of natural farming, of zero chemical farming, because I think that can give us a breakthrough, in a major way. And as I said, the Prime Minister supported it, but I'm not seeing that on the ground yet. I see AR as 113 research institutes, 74 universities, and some other centers. Hardly any one of them is working on examining the feasibility of zero chemical farming. So that's the very big change that we need to think about, because otherwise the same model of heavy fertilizer use, heavy urea use, and then the water table going down, the soil quality is being spoiled, cancer in the farmers and in the consumer. That model, I'm afraid,
Not sustainable.
will not work. So that's the big one that I hope this message goes to wherever, and that can be taken up.
Right, sir. On that note, sir, thanks a lot for this conversation. So that's a wrap on this edition of Fortune India in Conversation. For more news and updates, keep following Fortune India.